Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Corey Grantham, and I'm a consultant at Human Capital Growth. We at Human Capital Growth undertook an exhaustive review of the research done in 2016 in the field of talent management. Our goal was to uncover the year's most influential studies that address some of the most pressing problems in the world of work. Today's webinar will present the findings from 5 of those important studies. I will be co-hosting today's webinar along with 2 of my colleagues. First, we have fellow consultant Alyssa Perez.
Hi, everyone. So glad you're here.
Next, we have President and Founder of Human Capital Growth, Dr. Shreya Sarkar-Barney.
Hello, everyone. Pleasure to have you.
We are really excited to be leading this webinar today. There's a lot of exciting research coming out on talent management practices, which we are happy to share with you. Thank you again for joining us today. If you're not familiar with Human Capital Growth, we are a boutique talent management firm. Our mission is to help organizations and employees thrive together. We help organizations achieve talent management excellence and leadership excellence. We do this by putting a spotlight on the truth, as well as using empathy and insights from science and analytics. We have bases in the US and India. We work with clients ranging from non-for-profit entities to Fortune 500 companies around the world. You can see some of the clients we work with. Here's the range of services we offer. Human Capital Growth is excited to share that we now offer a full portfolio of solutions for optimizing your talent management function. If you'd like more information, please reach out to us. We will share our contact information at the end of this session. Before we begin, here's a quick overview of the conferencing platform we use, Zoom. If you need to test or adjust your computer's audio, you can do that by clicking on the audio settings button on the top left of the Zoom toolbar. You will notice that your audio is placed on mute when you enter the webinar session. You will be able to communicate with us through the use of the chat feature, which you can access from the chat button at the top of the Zoom toolbar. This chat feature allows you to connect with tech support for this webinar or to comment on the material being presented. Next to the chat button is the raise hand button, which allows you to comment or ask questions by voice. If you require HCG or HRCI recertification credits for your participation in today's webinar, please be sure that you have joined this session with your full name. Now let's begin our webinar. I'll turn it over to Shreya, who will present an overview of the topics we'll be discussing today.
Thank you, Corey. So welcome, everyone. We're really excited to bring this webinar to you based on research that we conducted just earlier this year, reviewing some of the most influential scientific studies that were published in 2016. What's exciting about our conversation today is that we will cover 5 HR problems that repeatedly show up as challenges organizations are trying to address. These are in the areas of diversity, leadership, the role of technology, particularly as it influences work-life balance. We will address this as M-work. The 4th issue we will deal with is the role of social media in hiring practices, and finally, employee engagement. One of the things that when we were doing our research, we were mindful of some of the HR trends or human capital trends that the industry across the world is talking about. And so here, what you will see in front of you is the 2017 Human Capital Trends report, and some of the most important topics that showed up, again, mapped very well on these 5 topics. So I won't go into the details. The only one that I'll call out is this year, Deloitte clubbed a number of topics together under employee experience. This includes topics such as engagement as well as work-life balance, which we will both address today. Well, so I want to draw your attention to 5 questions that we will look to answer for you through these questions. What our goal is to provide you with actionable advice that you can go back to your workplace and readily implement. So these questions relate to what are some surefire ways to achieve gender diversity in the workplace. The second one relates to how should you use social media in recruiting in a way that you get the most qualified candidates. The third question addresses what should be the role of technology, particularly as it relates to employees being connected after hours. In today's on-demand workforce, this is a challenge that we have to address as a society. And I think the studies provide some very helpful advice. The fourth point relates to what kind of leaders should you attract and grow within your organization, particularly in today's complex business and political climate. Again, we had some very helpful advice, some very, very actionable advice from the research. And finally, we'll address the topic of employee engagement and what works. So let me turn things back to you, Corey.
Okay, thank you, Shreya. So first, we'll examine ways in which gender diversity can be improved in organizations. So for this, we'll turn to Alyssa.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you again, everyone, for being with us. My name is Alyssa, as they said, and I will be talking to you about our first research question, which is, what are some surefire ways to achieve gender diversity in the workplace? In 2015, women held slightly more than half of all management and professional occupations, and also earned more than half of educational degrees at every educational level. But in spite of that, most female managers stay at entry-level or lower-level management positions. As demonstrated in particular by this graph of these S&P companies, you see that as you go higher up the ladder of management, the proportion of women represented shrinks. Women make up only a fraction of top earners, higher level managers, and CEOs. So this past year, there was one impactful study that shed some insight on the likely causes of this and what organizations can do to improve gender diversity. So, one important fact is that 70% of mothers are working. Approximately 1/3 of working women are mothers. Furthermore, women are typically expected to do more childcare and household chores than their male counterparts, and thus women carry the burden of extra housework. This discrepancy likely explains why working mothers tend to prefer part-time work to full-time work, and working women, especially mothers, have a need for greater work-family balance in order to enable them to excel and advance in the workplace. If firms want to increase their gender diversity, they must take additional steps to ensure work-family balance is possible for their employees. Because of this, this study was conducted to look at work-family balance as a predictor of women in management. So the study was done in Australia, and it focused on archival data. Data were collected from Australia's Workplace Gender Equality Agency, which requires that organizations report their gender composition in management and non-management roles, as well as workplace programs for improving gender equality and removing barriers for women entering and advancing within the organization. The study looked over these reports from the year 2002 until 2014 and analyzed them to determine if the reported work-life balance programs in place had any relationship with a proportion of women in management. The starting sample was 675 organizations that had submitted reports to the WGEA in 2006. The organizations had been operating an average of 64 years and employed on average 1,130 people. So, our first question to you is this. Which of the following programs does your organization offer in the way of work-family options? You can fill out all that apply. So the first is flexible leave options, which includes parental leave or taking care of a sick child for a short break. Flexible work schedules is the second option. The third option is direct provision of services, so childcare, elder care within the organization. And the fourth option is virtual office facilities, so working from home. There's also another option, and if you have another option that you know of, please feel free to write it to us in the chat. So, see the results of this in a moment.
So we have a few more people who have yet to vote. Just give them a couple more seconds, and then I'll end the polling.
Sure. So we will. These are the. Oh. Okay, great. This is really interesting. It's a pretty solid split across all of them. I see that flexible work schedules had the most response. So a lot of organizations are offering flexible hours, but there's also virtual office facilities is up there, which is kind of similar. They both show that organizations are being a bit flexible with schedules. A few less have direct provision of services, so that's interesting. Well, let's move on to the next slide. So the study findings show that the organizations and where they invest these resources matter. For gender diversity, work-life programs do make a difference, and the biggest return was found to come from work-life programs. However, it is important that the right conditions exist for these investments to pay off. That is, investments are less likely to produce results in male-dominated organizations. We have one other question for you with the study. Some of you answered in the previous poll that your organization does have work-family programs, and as we saw from our results, that's great. So now we're curious to see how long these programs have been offered in your organization. Have they been offered just a short while, less than 1 year, 1 to 2 years, 3 to 5 years, 6 to 8 years, or more than 8 years? So we'll wait on those results because this is also another important part of the study we are looking at today.
All right, we're waiting for a couple more seconds for everyone to vote. Votes are coming in, and let's just give everyone one last second, and then I'll end the polling. All right, there you go, Alyssa.
Thank you, Shreya. Oh, this is great. I'm seeing that most of the answers were on the higher end of the poll. So work-family programs have been around in your organizations for at least 3 years for the most part, I can see. And that's great. So the next finding from our study showed that if you answered longer than 8 years, your organization is on the right track. Another important finding by this study showed that how long companies invest in this incredibly important work-family balance is just as important as having it at all. The important effect of work-family programs on women in management showed results in the study only after an 8-year time lag. Therefore, organizations have to be prepared to make long-term investments in their work-family programs in order to reap the full benefits of these programs and gender diversity. So Shreya, can you tell us a little bit about what this finding means for our organizations?
Happy to, Alyssa. So before I go into the practical implications, one thing I'd like to draw our audience's attention to is when we look at any kind of research findings at Human Capital Growth, one of the first things we try to do is assess at what stage of the employee life cycle would those findings have any implications or practical use. And so you can see our model of hire, develop, manage, and support. The highlighted pieces where we find these results to be most useful is in how organizations manage their employees as well as what supportive mechanisms they provide. And so the first implication that we see is organizations need to design support mechanisms such as work-life balance programs across all different life stages of the employees to retain the workforce, not just in the childbearing age, but also women, as you rightly pointed out, Alyssa, tend to have a lot of the family care responsibility, including elder care. So providing options across one's life stage is very important to retain. The second most important finding for organizations that are looking to achieve better gender balance is to make long-term commitments in their work-life programs. And I think this is probably some of the most important findings that all organizations need to pay attention to, particularly in this day and age when many organizations are looking to their analytics effort to see what investments are paying off and when there is an ROI. I think there's some important implications here, because what we are seeing is that maybe in the first 3 or 4 years, you may see no change in gender balance, and organizations run the risk of cutting off their investments too soon. And I think that paying attention to these findings will help them reap the long-term benefits of these investments. I wanted to draw everyone's attention to one other critical piece of data. Right here in the Bay Area, one of the things that organizations have been talking about is the lack of gender balance in a lot of these technology companies, which tend to be primarily male dominated. And that is a challenge for many organizations to achieve gender balance. So one of the other things the study found is that in order for these investments to pay off, the work-life program investments, there needs to be a better balanced workforce to start with. So organizations shouldn't just be relying on these programs, but should also look at creating better gender balance through their hiring efforts. So although I didn't highlight hiring as one of those practical implications, but that is one of the others that we would also recommend. So I'll turn things back to you, Alyssa.
Thank you, Shreya. That was really helpful, and I'm glad that this study existed and shed light on those important topics. Actually, we're going to now turn back to Corey for our next study that we looked at. And go ahead, Corey.
Okay, thank you, Alyssa. That was an insightful look at how to increase gender diversity in organizations. Next, we'll examine how firms use technology in the employee selection process. Many of you have probably considered ways of using popular technology to aid your search for quality talent. You want tools that provide a lot of information about job candidates at minimal cost. One popular trend that I've noticed during my career as an HR manager is for hiring managers and recruiters to use social media sites such as LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter as tools for attracting and researching potential candidates. In 2008, 34% of organizations used social media sites as a recruiting tool. By 2013, that number had shot up significantly, and the Society of Human Resource Management reported that 77% of organizations use social media sites in some way for employee selection purposes. A senior manager for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in the US reported that approximately 3 out of 4 recruiters across multiple industries are required by their firms to conduct online research of job candidates. What's more, 70% of recruiters state that they have rejected candidates based on the material found on social media websites. Frequent updates to user privacy settings on social media platforms, especially on Facebook, have made gaining access to candidates' personal information much easier for prospective employers. But does the information featured in candidates' social media profiles predict their job performance? Besides posing potential problems for job applicants, searching a candidate's social media profile presents organizations with potentially damaging consequences. First, much of the information uncovered by recruiters from looking at social media profiles is not job-related. For example, one's age, hobbies, religious views, political leanings, and marital and relationship status all appear in one's Facebook profile, but have very little to do with the person's ability to perform most jobs. Using much of this type of information for employee selection is considered illegal in most states in the US and in many countries around the world. Despite the trend of using social media sites in the employee selection process, research has shown that viewing candidates' social media profiles to predict a candidate's success in the role doesn't work. Last year, Van Itteking, Lanovich, Roth, and Junko conducted a study in which they had staffing specialists and hiring managers from multiple organizations view and rate Facebook profiles of job applicants. These applicants were recent college graduates, and their Facebook profiles were used by the recruiters and hiring managers to rate them on 10 skills that are required for most jobs across any industry. After the applicant had been employed on the job an average of 13.7 months, the ratings made earlier by the recruitment professionals were compared to performance evaluations completed by each employee's supervisor. These two sets of ratings were then used to determine whether there was any correlation between the employee's predicted and actual job performance. If you recall, 70% of recruiters had reported rejecting candidates based on the information contained in the candidate's social media profile. This study found, however, that candidates' social media profiles did not predict job performance. That is, recruiters' ratings of applicants were not related to supervisors' ratings of the employee after the employee had been on the job for longer than a year. I would like to emphasize here that this study was not performed in a lab setting, and it actually involved real job candidates that went on to be employees in actual organizations. The recruiters that participated in the study were also real recruiters that had an average of 6.4 years of experience recruiting and selecting employees. So another critical finding of the study was that recruiters tended to prefer white females above all other subgroups, posing serious legal and ethical problems for organizations. For companies looking to achieve meritocracy and prevent adverse impact, the findings of the study are extremely problematic. So Shreya, should organizations be using social media sites at all for employee selection? If so, how should firms use these sites?
That's a good question, Corey. And as you know, we discussed this at length within our own team setting because companies are using social media, and that's the reality. So what is the best way to use social media is the question I'd like to address. And just to point everyone to, in terms of where would you find these study findings to be most useful, we believe it's in the hiring phase. So to answer your question, Corey, I think the perspective that organizations need to take is what is their ultimate goal in using social media for hiring? And it should be to identify the most qualified candidates for their open positions. And as we look at the study findings, what we see is that unfortunately, by using social media, they may be disqualifying the most important candidates that they're looking to target, and that's a concern. The second thing that we learned is that if they do rely on the information that is available on social media, that may not be most representative of their fit with the role, so it may not be serving their purpose. So to answer your question, the best use of social media is perhaps in generating a large candidate pool. I just recently read a statistic that Facebook, the number of people who are on Facebook is similar to maybe the third largest country in the world. So you can see the large reach that they have, and clearly it could be a very good tool to gather the largest number of candidates for an open position if that's the goal. The other important thing that I'd like to point out, and Corey, you already alluded to this, is the potential for reverse discrimination and the legal scrutiny that could bring. So as the study found, the recruiters, particularly in the United States, were more likely to select white female candidates by using social media, and that certainly could cause other kinds of problems for organizations, and therefore it is best to not use social media for screening purposes. So I'll turn things back to you.
Okay, so thank you for sharing your insights about this topic, Shreya. Next, Alyssa will talk about another topic related to the use of technology in the workplace.
Thank you so much, Corey. From social media, as you said, we're switching to another technology-related topic, which is to what extent should organizations expect employees to be connected after work hours? Many employees are working more and more after hours due to a constant technological connection to work. Pew Research found that 45% of employees report working in the family domain through their mobile devices. Working from home with a mobile device has been referred to as M-work. However, oftentimes this M-work is a necessary but involuntary part of the job for employees. And involuntary working from home through M-work has many negative effects on employees, such as burnout, less commitment to the organization, conflict with their families, and ultimately all these things can lead to turnover. A unique and important study conducted by Ferguson and his colleagues looked at the family, particularly the spouse's role in all of these negative work outcomes. So here's my next question to everyone. Does your organization have policies on M-work? If so, in the chat, please share and discuss what is in these policies. For example, some governments and organizations have proposed steps to limit the amount of working from home that employees can do. France recently proposed a law called the right to disconnect, which required that certain organizations over 50 employees could not require that their employees work from home. Volkswagen suggested shutting off email servers after hours. So if your organization has something like that, please let us know. There's not really any clear answers over which is common, which is better, but we do know that it's commonly believed that having more responsive employees leads to better opportunities, better being more competitive in your field, but also can lead to employee burnout and other negative outcomes. And so that's what this study was particularly trying to address. All right. So in particular, this study examined 344 employees and their spouses in a management firm. The study was interested in looking at how an employee's family can impact these outcomes at work. They examined work-family conflict in 3 facets. These were time-based conflict, which is when work takes time away from family activities and interactions with family members. Strain-based work-family conflict, which is when this extra work leads to stress and distraction for the job incumbent. And finally, behavior-based work-family conflict, which is when working from home triggers behaviors that are appropriate for interacting with a coworker, but not acceptable within the family context. Overall, this study found that working from home with a mobile device, or MWork, did in fact relate to work-to-family conflict, especially a spousal resentment of the organization. The study found that across gender, age, and number of children, MWork related to work-family conflict and resentment. Through conflict, spousal resentment lowers organizational commitment for both the incumbent and his or her spouse, which ultimately leads to turnover and tensions. The important finding here is that the path between MWork and turnover did not exist through just the incumbent alone, but occurred specifically through the spouse's resentment. Shreya, would you mind talking a bit about what this finding means for our organizations?
Certainly. The most important finding, we believe, it relates to how organizations create supportive work environments. And as you pointed out, requiring employees to be constantly connected not just impacts their perceptions toward the organization, but also their spouse's perception. However, we have to be careful as we interpret these findings by not looking to mandate or ban MWork in total, because for some employees, this could be a way that they achieve work-life balance by taking time off, maybe during work, but working after hours when the children are asleep or so. However, I think the most important finding is to raise consciousness about managing family time, educating employees that it is important to manage both, not just your perceptions with your manager at work, but also how your family reacts to you working at home should also be considered. So we believe that the results of this study are most useful for creating supportive work cultures where there's no negative consequence for those who do choose to prioritize family time, which is that they choose to turn their phones off during after hours, and there is no negative perceptions associated with that. Again, a lot of the findings, as you will note, relate to creating supportive cultures, which has become a huge topic in many organizations. And we think that every one of these studies has some implications, particularly to the topic of organizational culture. So I'll turn things back to you, Alyssa.
Thank you, Shreya. That's very helpful, and I thought this was a really important and interesting study. So now we're going to go back to Corey for our next topic.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alyssa. I know from my time as an HR manager that is very helpful guidance for policy development. Next, we will talk about leadership. This is a perennial challenge for most organizations. The topic of this next study is getting a lot of coverage right now in the media. Well, let's begin with a poll. So of the two leaders we're about to describe, who do you think will be the better team leader? The first leader, Alex, avoids all appearances of being weak. Alex exhibits confidence and behaves self-righteously. Alex seeks personal status above the status of the team, and Alex will not publicly acknowledge mistakes. Chris, on the other hand, recognizes team members' contributions and shows appreciation for effort. Chris is open to new ideas, places the goals of the team over personal goals, and will admit and correct personal mistakes. So, who do you think will be the better leader, Alex or Chris? I'll give you a moment to select your response.
All right, I'm going to end the poll.
Okay.
And share the results. There you go.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I'm not able to view the poll on my screen.
So it's a clear majority for Chris.
For Chris, okay. So, so under everyday circumstances, the correct answer would be Chris. But don't worry, if you chose Alex, then you are not alone. Many people in the Western world, including the United States, Canada, Britain, and many parts of Europe would select Alex's leader behaviors as the most effective at driving their teams to achieve results. In fact, during my career as an HR manager and recruiter, I found that many organizations asked recruiters to look for these traits specifically when selecting leaders for any level of leadership within their organizations. But do these behaviors actually make for an effective leader? A study conducted by Owens and Heckman this past year suggests that an unlikely leader behavior may yield better team and organizational outcomes. That behavior is humility. But what exactly do we mean by humility? Humility is a misunderstood behavior often associated with weakness in the United States. The field of psychology, however, defines humility as an attribute that occurs in a social context, and it is characterized by a willingness to view one's own strengths and weaknesses accurately and to judge other strengths and shortcomings accurately as well. Being humble also means being teachable and open to growth experience. A leader who demonstrates humility will foster a supportive organizational context by drawing focus to others' strengths, encouraging others to share their perspectives, possess a willingness to acknowledge his or her own limitations, and support others' growth and achievement. Furthermore, a humble leader will inspire follower loyalty and commitment, reinforce job satisfaction, work engagement, and employee retention, and temper the negative effects of leader narcissism, leading to more positive follower outcomes. A non-humble or authoritarian leader will avoid all appearances of being weak. He or she will be overconfident and self-righteous, will not publicly acknowledge mistakes, and will seek personal status above the status of his or her own team. These behaviors are contagious and will create teams of competitive individuals vying for individual status instead of focusing on achieving the goals of the team. So last year, a study examining the effects of leader humility on team performance was conducted. Using data from 607 subjects organized into 161 teams, this study induced humility in a laboratory setting, in a longitudinal lab study across 6 weeks, and in a field study completed in a health services context. Participants in all 3 studies completed tasks and then rated the humility of their leaders, their teams, or both. The results of the study showed that leaders' humble behavior was contagious and that leaders modeling humility inspired team members to be humble as well. In the end, the teams led by the humble leader performed better on all of their respective tasks. The findings of this study demonstrate that humble leaders contribute to better team performance. Furthermore, humble leader behaviors are most effective during periods of moderate stress when teams are faced with everyday challenges. Transformational leadership, on the other hand, was found to succeed during times of great uncertainty when teams are under tremendous amounts of stress. These periods call for charismatic leaders who can provide teams with compelling new visions. So Shreya, can you describe for us the ways in which leaders and organizations can use the results of the study?
Certainly, Corey. I think one of the most important things that came out of this particular study is an understanding of the mechanism through which humble leaders contribute to better team performance. Because oftentimes people might think, well, humble leaders, it sounds intuitive that they should be better, but how they're better is important. And you rightly pointed out that good and bad leader behaviors are contagious, meaning it draws attention to what the leader emphasizes. In the case of humble leaders, they emphasize the right kind of teamwork. So they emphasize cooperation over competition, as well as team goals over individual goals, and create a cognitive focus that improves team performance. And that's really important in today's distracted world. The second way in which humble leaders contribute to team performance is by, again, creating the right culture where their role model, or through their role modeling, create expectations for openness, for learning, admitting mistakes, and allowing others to be an expert. In other words, sharing their leadership with others. And so these are the two important mechanisms: creating the right focus and promoting the right culture, through which humble leaders lead to better team performance. In terms of what organizations can do as a result of these findings, is to screen leaders who have a tendency to be more humble. So clearly there's some implications on the hiring phase. The other interesting thing that came out of this study is that you could actually develop a leader to be more humble. Now, not to a large extent, but you could take a leader who may have a little bit more hubris than others and at least teach them a few behavioral skills to be humble. And I think that was a very significant finding. The third element is that organizations, again, through their reward and management mechanism, recognize and reinforce humble leadership behaviors, as well as discourage non-humble leader behaviors, particularly in cultures where there may be a little bit more preference for being more autocratic or non-humble. I think there's some important findings here. And then finally, to be more mindful of what it takes for teams to succeed and what kind of supportive environments are required. And what the study says is appoint team leaders who are humble. So those would be it, Corey.
Okay. Thank you for sharing your expertise on this topic, Shreya. Now we will move on to a different topic that continues to be a pressing concern for organizations. Alyssa, I turn it back over to you to discuss managing employee engagement.
Thank you, Corey. Leadership, of course, is a really important topic, as we saw at the beginning in the Deloitte's recent Human Capital Trends report. Now we're going to end on another topic that was in their report, which is the important study on work engagement. Gallup recently estimated that employee disengagement cost the U.S. workforce $450 to $550 billion in lost productivity every year. Not only that, but organizations are spending $750 million per year on engagement programs in order to remedy this problem. So we want you to think a little bit about your engagement problems and your engagement interventions within your own organizations as we go through the study. What are some initiatives that your organizations are using in order to promote engagement? I invite you to think about those programs, and you're welcome to comment in the chat box what they might be as I continue to describe the types of interventions that were used in this study. Please think about and compare where your organization's program might fit. So the study on engagement was a meta-analysis which reviewed 20 empirical research studies. The sample was a total of 3,652 participants across the studies. And overall, there were 4 major types of interventions that were found by the study. The first is personal resource building interventions, which focus on increasing individuals' self-perceived positive attributes, their strengths, and is often include developing self-efficacy, resilience, or optimism. The second type of intervention were job resource building interventions. These interventions focus on increasing resources in the work environment, such as autonomy, social support, and feedback. Third, there were leadership training interventions, which kind of goes back to Corey's last topic, which involve knowledge and skill building workshops for managers. And these interventions measure work engagement within the direct employees of the managers. Fourth, health promoting interventions, which encourage employees to adopt and sustain healthier lifestyles and manage stress. For example, exercise is a common one that is used in these interventions. The study defined work engagement as a state of mind that is characterized by vigor, dedication, and absorption. Vigor refers to high energy and mental resilience while working. Dedication refers to being intensely involved in work tasks and experiencing an associated sense of significance, enthusiasm, and challenge. Finally, absorption is a state of full concentration on work and a positive engrossment on it. They measured these three things as well as an overall work engagement. The meta-analysis ultimately revealed a small, positive, but reliable effect of work engagement. These engagement interventions did have an effect. One important finding is that the engagement program should be designed based on individual needs and not as unit-wide programs. Furthermore, the study examined time's effect on these interventions. Overall work engagement and vigor demonstrated large effects immediately post-interventions, where dedication and absorption were more strongly related at a later follow-up time. In other words, people were more engaged and energetic immediately after these interventions. However, at later times, the interventions increased employee involvement and concentration in their work. Shreya, what does this tell our organizations as we invest in employee engagement?
So Alyssa, I think one of the most important findings in this study is when do employee engagement programs pay off? And it's what you pointed to, which is when you enable individuals to manage their engagement, there are better results than doing it as a unit-wide program. And that has some design implications for organizations. The second piece that I'd like to call out again relates to workforce analytics, which is if you look at the outcomes that these programs deliver, the outcomes are different at different points in time. So what you mentioned was that the results first demonstrated improvements in vigor, followed by dedication and absorption. And therefore, the role of time is very critical, particularly as you're looking to understand the impact of these programs. So those would be some of the things I would call out as practical implications of this study.
Thank you so much, Shreya. Before we reach the end of this webinar, would you mind giving us an overview of key takeaways from these 5 important studies?
I'd be happy to. So the first thing I want to call out is what does one do with these types of findings? And what we typically do within our own consulting practice is start by auditing the company's existing practice. So that's what we would recommend is start by looking at how you do things today, and then it will be clear on what you need to do. So the second piece would be to educate other people, your HR teams, your management, in terms of what these studies are saying, because it will help you get to the results faster without wasting time, in more trial and error and experimentation. Although we do encourage experimenting, but make it more controlled by utilizing these studies. Third would be to redesign your systems and measure and analyze and improve. So that would be the complete cycle. More specifically, what I want to recommend is these 5 sets of advice based on the studies. The first is when we looked at the work-life programs, as you saw that it has direct impact on the gender balance in the organization. So what we suggest is take a look at how long your organization has been investing in work-life balance programs. And year over year, what changes have you seen in gender distribution? And as you now know, perhaps if you're in the early years, between 1 to 4 years, you may not be seeing a lot of impact, and you'll have to work with your leadership to continue the investment. So there's some very clear guidance that you can now provide. The second piece surrounds the use of social media. So if you are using social media to screen candidates, one thing that we would recommend is to look at the quality of the candidates that you're not selecting. You probably have a sense of the candidates that you are selecting, but can you do some forensic analysis to identify, well, who is it that we turned away, and could they have been our next Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg? The third piece revolves around your company's norms surrounding M work. So definitely take a look at what you believe or what your organization current practices are around M work. And within our teams, we actually discuss what would be the most accurate way to get these findings. One would be to do the survey. Second would be to just listen in the organization for what people are saying about the culturally accepted ways of disconnecting after hours. And you'll probably hear some things through the grapevine, look through your company's own internal social media, and you might get some indicators there as well. And the most important piece here is to focus on shaping the culture rather than more policy-based mandates. The fourth piece relates to leadership. And so what we recommend here is to look at your successful and not so successful projects. Then try to assess what types of leaders are heading these projects. And is there a way for you to do maybe some assessments of the team to understand what the team members think are the quality of the leaders? Are they humble or not humble? And there you might have some opportunities to deliver some interventions. If you're not able to select the team leaders, then at least deliver some training for these team leaders and to help them create the right expectations. And finally, the findings on work engagement are extremely helpful. So take a look at the different types of programs your organization is using to promote engagement. There's 4 types that Alyssa called out based on the study. Which ones of those are you implementing? And if you're doing only 1 or 2, you have opportunities to expand your offerings. And secondly, look at how these programs are deployed. Are they more organization-wide, or is it more a choice that employees exercise in terms of determining what is best for them? And one of the big trends that we are, or I would say one of the early signs that we're starting to see, and we are hoping it becomes a trend, is that engagement is something that people self-manage for themselves, because that's when it is most impactful, and it is most impactful in preventing burnout. So I'll stop over here, Alyssa, and turn things back to you.
Thanks again, Shreya. That was really helpful information. So we want to thank you for joining us today, and we wanted to point out a recent article we wrote and had published in PsyOps Tip magazine, which covers this and also has some more important findings from 2016. So if you're interested, that can be read online and it's available for everyone. So we really suggest you go take a look at that. Finally, we have a few minutes left here for some questions if there are any about any of the topics we've discussed today. Please feel free to comment or ask any questions now. If you have any further questions in the future, you're always welcome to reach out to us as well. Our contact information is going to be available at the end of this webinar. So are there any questions?
So just wanted to call out, so anyone interested to ask your questions by voice, just raise your hand and I can promote you to a panelist, or you can type your questions in the chat box and we'll be happy to answer.
Mm-hmm.
We'll give everyone just a second, and if not, Alyssa, you can continue, and then we'll definitely be around and take questions even after the session.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, we'll just point out that we have another webinar coming up. It is on digitization digitization of the learning and development function. And that will be held on Thursday, June 15th, 2017 at 8 a.m. Pacific time. So please join us for that webinar as well. We'd be happy to have you again. If you enjoyed this session, you may be interested in some of our other services. If your company is interested in a free hour consultation about any of the topics discussed in today's webinar, please email us at info@humancapitalgrowth.com. We're also available by email, as mentioned before, if you have any other questions regarding any of our topics discussed today. If you would like to reach out to us, there they are. Thank you again for joining, everyone, and please enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Corey and Alyssa.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was a really fun session to get ready for.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and feel free to reach out to any of us about any of the studies that we covered individually today, or if you have any other questions about the tip article or anything else we can assist you with.
So we can just stay for just a few more minutes.